Tommy Robinson, hero or villain? Early life and background. Tommy Robinson, born Stephen Christopher Yaxley, emerged as one of Britain's most controversial public figures. Born on November 27, 1982, in Luton, Bedfordshire, England, Robinson grew up in a working-class neighbourhood heavily influenced by immigration and industrial decline. The diverse and often challenging environment of Luton would later shape much of his worldview and political motivations. Raised by his mother, who worked as a bakery manager, and his stepfather, a carpenter, Robinson's early life was marked by financial struggles and a strong sense of community among working-class families. He attended Chalney High School for Boys, where he was known to be intelligent and outspoken. However, his education was disrupted by frequent tensions both inside and outside the classroom. Luton itself was a microcosm of Britain's evolving social fabric, with a rich blend of cultures but also simmering divisions. As manufacturing jobs disappeared and economic hardship grew, the town became a flashpoint for racial and cultural tensions. These experiences planted the seeds for Robinson's later activism, especially as he witnessed firsthand the challenges faced by his peers and family. In his early adulthood, Robinson trained as a carpenter and took pride in a steady, hands-on career. However, life took an unexpected turn. A series of personal and local incidents began to push him towards political awareness, focusing on issues like immigration, integration, and Islam's role in British society. By the time he was in his 20s, Robinson had become vocal about his views, often clashing with others in his community over sensitive topics. Despite the polarizing nature of his beliefs, Robinson's charisma and directness earned him both staunch supporters and fierce critics. This foundation, built in the crucible of Luton's cultural conflicts, set the stage for his eventual rise as a political activist. Initial career and interests. Before Tommy Robinson became a household name, his early adult years reflected the life of an ordinary working-class man. After leaving school, Robinson pursued a career in carpentry, a trade that provided him with stability and a sense of purpose. His skill in the craft earned him consistent work, and for a time, he seemed destined to lead a life far removed from the public spotlight. However, Robinson's interests extended beyond his job. Growing up in Luton, a town grappling with significant socio-economic challenges, he became keenly aware of the cultural and political shifts around him. He often described how certain events, such as the rise of Islamic extremism in his hometown and violent clashes between communities, ignited his interest in social and political matters. A pivotal moment came when Robinson witnessed a series of protests and counter-protests in Luton that underscored the tension between various ethnic and religious groups. He began attending rallies and engaging in discussions about British identity, immigration, and the perceived erosion of traditional values. These experiences played a crucial role in shaping his future ideology. In his personal life, Robinson was a passionate football fan, frequently attending matches to support his local team, Luton Town FC. Football culture, particularly the camaraderie and tribalism surrounding it, provided him with an outlet to bond with others who shared his background. Yet, the terraces also exposed him to the darker undercurrents of nationalism and division that were beginning to brew in certain sections of British society. Robinson's initial foray into activism began modestly. He participated in local discussions, occasionally voicing his concerns about issues he felt were ignored by mainstream politics. Over time, his views became more defined, focusing on what he perceived as the unchecked influence of radical Islam in Britain. His candid approach, though divisive, resonated with many who felt similarly unheard or marginalized. Formation of the English Defence League, EDL. In 2009, Tommy Robinson took a decisive step that would transform him from a local activist to a national figure. The catalyst was a controversial event in his hometown of Luton. During a parade to honor British soldiers returning from Afghanistan, a group of radical Islamists disrupted the ceremony, holding signs denouncing the soldiers as murderers and butchers. For Robinson, this incident epitomized the growing tensions he perceived between radical Islam and British society. Galvanized by this event, Robinson and a small group of like-minded individuals founded the English Defence League, EDL. The EDL presented itself as a grassroots movement committed to opposing what it called the Islamification of Britain and standing up against radical Islam. Initially, the group gained traction through online platforms and social media, where it shared videos, photos, and posts about its mission. Robinson quickly became the face of the organization, adopting the pseudonym Tommy Robinson to shield his personal identity, borrowed from a local football hooligan. His charismatic leadership and ability to articulate his message in a way that resonated with disaffected communities propelled the EDL into the national spotlight. The EDL's activities often centered around street demonstrations, many of which were marked by significant controversy. Critics accused the group of fostering Islamophobia, racism, and violence, while supporters framed their actions as a necessary response to government inaction on issues like radical extremism and cultural integration. Under Robinson's leadership, the EDL rapidly expanded its membership and reach. The group organized protests in cities across the UK, often attracting hundreds or even thousands of supporters. However, these events frequently descended into clashes with counter-protesters, leading to heavy police presence and media scrutiny. Legal issues and controversies. Tommy Robinson's career has been as much defined by his activism as by his frequent clashes with the law. From the early days of the English Defence League, EDL, to his later activism and media appearances, Robinson became a figure embroiled in legal battles and controversies, often making headlines as much for his courtroom appearances as his public demonstrations. One of Robinson's earliest legal troubles came during his time leading the EDL. The group's protests often turned volatile, and Robinson himself was arrested multiple times for charges including public order offenses, incitement, and assault. Critics argued that his provocative rhetoric fueled tensions that led to violence, while Robinson maintained he was exercising his right to free speech. In 2011, Robinson faced a high-profile conviction for leading a protest in Tower Hamlets, a predominantly Muslim area in London, while defying police restrictions. This marked the beginning of a string of legal disputes tied to his activism. The same year, he was sentenced to 12 months for using someone else's passport to travel to the United States, a trip Robinson said was necessary to speak about his concerns regarding radical Islam. Robinson's financial dealings also came under scrutiny. In 2014, he was convicted of mortgage fraud and sentenced to 18 months in prison. His critics saw this as evidence of personal misconduct, while Robinson insisted the charges were politically motivated, aiming to silence his activism. Perhaps the most controversial episode in Robinson's legal history occurred in 2018 when he was arrested outside a court in Leeds. Robinson had live-streamed defendants in a grooming gang trial, breaching a court-imposed reporting restriction designed to ensure a fair trial. His subsequent imprisonment on contempt of court charges sparked international outcry. Supporters framed the arrest as an attack on free speech, while legal experts emphasized the importance of upholding judicial impartiality. Robinson served 2 months before his conviction was overturned on procedural grounds, but he was later retried and sentenced to additional time in 2019. These legal battles further polarized public opinion. To his supporters, Robinson was a martyr for free speech and a crusader against radical Islam. To his detractors, he was a provocateur whose actions endangered public order and undermined the justice system. Beyond the courtroom, Robinson's controversial statements and associations continued to generate backlash. Allegations of fostering hate speech and links to far-right groups plagued his reputation, even as he distanced himself from certain factions. Media outlets frequently scrutinized his activities, amplifying both the support and opposition he received. Despite his frequent arrests and convictions, Robinson remained defiant, using each legal battle to bolster his profile. His ability to rally public support, even from international figures and organizations, highlighted the deep divisions surrounding his cause and methods. Departure from the EDL. In 2013, after 4 years at the helm of the English Defence League, EDL, Tommy Robinson made the surprising decision to step down as its leader. The announcement marked a pivotal moment in his career, sparking debate over whether this was a genuine change of heart or a strategic move to rebrand his activism. Robinson's departure came amidst growing concerns about the direction of the EDL. While the group initially focused on opposing radical Islam, it increasingly became associated with far-right ideologies, racism, and violent protests. Robinson himself expressed frustration with the infiltration of extremist elements into the movement, claiming it had strayed far from its original mission. In his resignation statement, Robinson cited the challenges of managing the EDL's image and maintaining control over its membership. He publicly condemned those within the organization who promoted hate, insisting his fight was against radical Islam, not Muslims as a whole. Robinson's efforts to distinguish between the two, however, were met with skepticism by critics who viewed the EDL's activities as inherently divisive. Another significant factor behind Robinson's exit was his collaboration with the Quilliam Foundation, a counter-extremism think tank. The foundation, led by former Islamist Maajid Nawaz, facilitated Robinson's departure and sought to present it as a step toward de-radicalization. In a joint press conference, Robinson and Nawaz emphasized their shared commitment to combating extremism through peaceful dialogue rather than street protests. The move drew mixed reactions. Supporters saw it as a courageous act of self-reflection and a willingness to evolve, while detractors dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Some former allies within the EDL accused Robinson of betraying the movement, while opponents argued that his rhetoric and actions had already caused irreparable harm. Despite leaving the EDL, Robinson did not abandon his activism. He continued to voice concerns about radical Islam but now sought to do so through alternative platforms and methods. This transition allowed him to maintain his profile as a public figure while attempting to distance himself from the controversies that had plagued the EDL. However, the shadow of his past leadership lingered. The EDL remained active under new leadership but struggled to maintain the same level of influence without Robinson's charismatic presence. Meanwhile, Robinson faced ongoing criticism for his role in founding and popularizing the group, with many arguing that his departure did little to mitigate the damage it had caused. Journalism and activism. After his departure from the English Defence League (EDL) in 2013, Tommy Robinson shifted his focus to journalism and activism, seeking to broaden his reach and reshape his public image. While distancing himself from the EDL street protests, Robinson embraced new platforms and strategies to continue his crusade against radical Islam and what he perceived as censorship in the UK. Robinson's foray into journalism began with his association with online media outlets that catered to audiences skeptical of mainstream reporting. He produced videos, conducted interviews, and investigated issues he believed were overlooked by traditional media. Much of his content centered on Islamic extremism, grooming gang scandals, and perceived failures of law enforcement and government authorities to address sensitive topics. One of Robinson's most prominent ventures was his work with Rebel Media, a Canadian far-right online platform. During his tenure, Robinson reported on issues such as the migrant crisis in Europe, the impact of Islamic extremism in Western countries, and free speech debates. His reports often featured dramatic, on-the-ground footage, blending sensationalism with his personal commentary. Robinson's style of activism increasingly leaned on his ability to mobilize supporters through social media. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube became vital tools for sharing his message and rallying his followers. His live streams and videos garnered millions of views, amplifying his reach and influence. However, his growing online presence also attracted criticism, with opponents accusing him of spreading misinformation and fostering division. Despite his attempts to transition into a more journalistic role, Robinson's methods often landed him in legal trouble. His live-streamed coverage of grooming gang trials, for instance, sparked significant controversy. Critics accused him of jeopardizing judicial processes and inflaming public sentiment, while Robinson framed his actions as an effort to expose the truth. Robinson's activism also extended to public demonstrations, albeit on a smaller scale than during his EDL days. He continued to organize rallies and speeches, often drawing both passionate supporters and vocal counter-protesters. These events further solidified his image as a polarizing figure, with some viewing him as a free speech advocate and others as a provocateur. Throughout this period, Robinson framed himself as a voice for those disillusioned with political correctness and mainstream media narratives. He cultivated an image as an underdog challenging powerful institutions, which resonated with segments of the public who felt ignored or marginalized. His activism attracted international attention, with figures in the United States and Europe praising his efforts while others denounced him as a dangerous demagogue. The dual roles of journalist and activist allowed Robinson to sustain his public profile while diversifying his methods. However, this approach also blurred the lines between reporting and advocacy, raising questions about his objectivity and credibility. Robinson's post-EDL activism underscored his ability to adapt and remain a prominent, albeit contentious, figure in British and global debates on free speech, extremism, and identity.